Welcome to today's Sustainable Living Festival session, Power or Lack Thereof in a Zombie Apocalypse. I'm Kelly Porter, Manager of Communications at LES. And just a couple things that we wanted to let you know about today's webinar. It will be recorded. And even though you're in listen only and view only mode, we encourage you to submit questions and answers. You can do that at the bottom of your screen. There's an icon that says Q&A. So at this point in time, I'd like to introduce you to our two speakers for today, Scott Benson, who's the manager at LES of Resource and Transmission Planning, and Mark Shkolnick, who is the manager of Energy Services at LES. So Mark, take it away.
Thanks, Kelly, and thank you all for spending a part of your afternoon with us. We're going to be talking about powering through a zombie apocalypse. And, you know, I want to assure you that with all the craziness going on in our society today is a simulation. It's not an actual apocalypse. The scene behind me is not actually going on in our community. I want to make sure that everybody is aware that this is just a simulation, okay? We're going to talk about what LES would have to do if we had some type of zombie apocalypse. And I think to begin the conversation, I think that it's important to remember the wisdom of what a utility is really in the business of doing. The wisdom of the utility is that we're in the business of balance. We're in the business of balance. Scott, do you know who said that once long ago, that utilities are in the business of balance?
I don't know, did I say it?
No, I did. I just said it right now. But the fact of the matter is, that is what we're in the business of. If you boil it all down, we're in the business of balance. And you think about it, we literally have to balance the amount of energy being generated with the amount of energy being consumed at any 1 second, every hour, every day, all the year, all the time. And Scott's going to get into that in more detail. But there's a real time balance going on there. We're also in the balance business of determining what kind of generation we ought to have to optimally provide our customers with reliable, affordable, and environmentally sensitive energy. And Scott's going to get into those details as well through his presentation here. But what I want to talk about is the balance of values our customers have, like you, the value of renewables and the environment, the balance with reliability, and the balance of providing affordable service. Now, let me make clear that at the very top of the list of those is safety. Safety's first. We don't compromise safety, so safety becomes number one. But when we look at those other variables, the renewable generation and the environment and affordability and reliable service, we have to do a balance. So that leads me to a question I'd like to pose to everybody, and I'd like you to respond. And that is, in your opinion, what is the most important service that Lincoln Electric System provides to the community? Either reliable energy, affordable energy, or sustainable, environmentally sensitive energy. And I'll go ahead and have you respond, and then I'll have Kelly, once those responses in, I'll have Kelly share those results. You should have the poll up on your screen, and you can go ahead and respond. We're getting results in, Kelly?
Yep, it looks like we are about there.
It's not an easy decision if you think about it, because it's a balance.
All right, we'll go ahead and end it now.
Let's see what we got. So the results to this poll: reliable energy, well over half, over 2/3 actually indicated reliable energy, but a representative group of almost 25% said affordable energy was even more important. And there was about 10% that sustainable, environmentally sensitive energy was most important. Kelly, I'm going to ask folks if they would like, raise your hand if you put that the most important thing for LES to provide is affordable energy. I'm wondering if they have the ability to do that, or actually I don't see a raise the hand option. But
We have a chat feature.
We do have the chat feature. So if somebody wants to enter and I answered affordable energy in the chat box, if you'd be willing to provide your perspective, we can. I did affordable energy. Okay, so I wonder if Andrew would be somebody that we could unmute and see if he can provide a little more perspective on his response. Andrew, thank you for responding.
Andrew, you are currently unmuted.
You want to unmute yourself, Andrew? Let's see if Andrew can unmute himself. And
Andrew left.
Oh, did we?
Andrew doesn't want to talk anymore.
Oh, I think like a zombie, we must have scared him away. Well, that's interesting. If anyone else would be interested in sharing their perspective, I'm just curious to see how people reach their decision. Obviously, there was quite a few folks who indicated reliability. If you'd like to speak to that, just put I will in your chat box, and we'll see who you are, and we can have you provide your perspective. Or there were some folks that put renewable energy, and I'd be interested in that perspective. But we can go on to the next poll question, and if somebody would like to share their thoughts, they can do that anytime as we set up for Scott here in just a minute. So let's imagine now that we've had the worst of the worst situations occur. We have outages for all kinds of reasons. We have squirrels, and we have lightning, and we have trees in lines, but we've never had, to my knowledge, this occur, and that is a zombie apocalypse. And so if we had a zombie apocalypse, what would be the most important service LES would need to provide to the community? Reliable electric service, affordable electric service, or sustainable and environmentally sensitive electric service? And we'll take those poll results, and Kelly will share what she finds from what you provide here.
They're still coming in.
Okay.
But there's going to be one less vote than last time since you guys scared away.
We scared away Andrew.
I did not mean to scare him away. I just wanted to get some perspective on things, that's all. Oh, goodness. No question, reliability. 93% of you indicated that providing reliable electric service, even more, Scott, interestingly, even more than just during normal times, reliable electric service becomes tantamount in a zombie apocalypse. There's still an individual out there that says, you know, there may be a zombie apocalypse, but I want my bill affordable. And there's somebody out there who says, no matter what, we need to make sure we're using renewable energy to produce our electricity. That's interesting. Okay, let's move on to the third question, the final question before we get to Scott here. And that is, following a zombie apocalypse, okay, how would a community continue to receive electric service? And here are your options. Would power plants continue to operate autonomously? Would they just, well, they not continue, but would they operate autonomously? Wind solar generation would continue without any hesitancy. Is that the most accurate statement? Would excess energy be stored prior to the apocalypse, and then we can just, you know, survive for X number of days on stored energy? Or is the most correct answer no practical way to really provide electric service following a zombie apocalypse? So let's get folks' input on that question.
Waiting for just a couple more. Okay, there we go.
All right. And the results indicate a mix of responses. We have about a third that said that power plants would just continue to operate autonomously. Another third said the wind and solar would continue on without any hesitancy. just less than a third said there's no practical way to make this happen, and about 7% said we would be good if we had the energy stored. So that's a good way to tee off Scott Benson, who's going to talk about how things actually work and what a zombie apocalypse would do to our generation of electricity. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Scott Benson.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I think those were great results there. I'm going to take you through a little bit of what popular science, pop culture shows we see in a zombie apocalypse with the way of electricity. Right here is a screenshot of popular game, Call of Duty, World War II Zombies. So you're running around, you're hunting yourself some zombies, and what do you see back there in the background? The lights are on, right? Okay, so yeah, at least the people that make Call of Duty, they figure things are going to keep running, lights will be on. Then we go and look at movies. We got an example here, Zombieland. Hopefully a lot of you have seen Zombieland. We've got a clip to show you. So we've got a bunch of folks who are traveling around the country after a zombie apocalypse, and they end up here. You can see it like a carnival, Worlds of Fun type place. And as you notice, there's lights on all over. We've got all kinds of lights, zombies running all over. I think you'll even notice here in a second, it's going to come up here. All the rides are still operating. Everything's pretty much like normal. There's just nobody there other than zombies and a few people. You can see the rides going there in the background. Got another example here for you from the movies. Return of the Living Dead Part 2. We pull up this one, and it starts off with the, I think, obligatory piece of every zombie movie. You have a bunch of zombies, a horde of zombies, and they've got some innocent bystanders trapped, right? So you always got to try and find yourself a hardened location to wait out the zombie apocalypse. But here you notice we got a young boy that appears to be in the control room of a power plant. He's going to flip the master switch because everything's got a master switch. Power comes back on, and in this case, it turns out really well for him because the power comes back on and it happens to electrocute all the zombies. So that was a good turn of events for them. But they think the power is pretty reliable there. And then the last one we've got for you is the movie I Am Legend. Probably a little more realistic view of these things. And I don't want to ruin the movie for anybody, but you've got a young woman here with her son, and they're showing up at a hardened area where a bunch of people have kind of hunkered down. And if you see there in the clip, you can see distribution wires, some electrical service wires hung there. Gives you the idea that this makeshift community does have power during the zombie apocalypse. And as we walk through here, we'll be able to even see a broader view of the area they're in and what they have serving their needs. So you can see they've got their wall there, their safety bunker. And if you look up at the very top right corner, you can see some wind turbines turning. So they're giving the idea that they've got wind turbines within this compound. There might even been some solar panels back there that they're keeping the power on. And there's a view for you. If you zoom in, you can see the wind turbines there. So giving you an idea that they've hunkered down, they've got some wind turbines, they're able to keep the electricity on. So there's no doubt when you watch movies, you watch video games, they give you the idea that, you know what, there might be a zombie apocalypse, but the power grid just keeps on humming. So we're going to work through that and see some of the complexities that actually go into running the grid on a normal day. And then we'll kind of revisit, could you do this under a zombie apocalypse? Let me give you a little bit of background on LES, and then we'll start to build towards the information you need to answer this. So if we look at LES's generation portfolio, we have coal plants across 3 states, Wyoming, Nebraska, and Iowa. We get hydroelectric power from a series of dams, mostly to the north and northeast of us, from the Western Area Power Administration, or WAPA. We have 3 local natural gas plants. If you look there at the little blow up of the community, one of which is combined cycle. It's one of only 2 combined cycles in the state of Nebraska. Typically, with a natural gas plant, you put natural gas in its simplest form, and you get electricity out. But there's also a byproduct, just like with your car, a lot of heat goes out the exhaust stack. So with a combined cycle, you capture that heat, you run it through a steam turbine, to create even more electricity. And so for the same amount of natural gas going in, you get even more output coming out. We have a pretty large wind portfolio, and it spans 3 states, Nebraska, Kansas, and Oklahoma. If you see the little green dot there, that is our landfill gas project. We partner with the city of Lincoln to capture methane that's produced naturally as the garbage decomposes in the Lincoln landfill. And then we use that methane to power about 5 megawatts of electricity all year round. And I'll give you a rule of thumb for megawatts. 1 megawatt is enough to power about 250 average Lincoln homes. And then finally, we have our community solar project that sits just west of town just west of the airport, actually, along Interstate 80. It was the first large-scale utility solar project in the state of Nebraska. So that's LES's portfolio. We draw on all those different resources to provide reliable service to our customers and the area. Now, to show you how that's changed over time, in 2008, this was LES's generation mix on a nameplate basis. And nameplate means what that unit is capable of putting out at maximum output. So if you have a natural gas or a coal plant, it basically means you put all the max rate of fuel in and you get the max amount of energy out. For wind and solar, it really means what's the maximum I can get out if Mother Nature is giving me all the fuel I need in the form of wind or the sun. And so what you can see there is we had a pretty even split in 2008 between natural gas and coal. And then really for 2008, a pretty healthy dose of renewables. This is what it looked like in 2019. It's pretty even split now between gas, renewables, and the remainder filled up by coal. So a big shift in about 10, 11 years. If you look at the energy that those renewable assets actually produce, in 2008, all of LES's renewable resources produced an amount of energy that was equivalent to about 8% of our total retail sales. When I say total retail sales, that's the amount of energy consumed by everybody that gets a bill that says LES right on the top of it. You add all that up, and the renewables put out about 8% of that. Well, if you fast forward to 2019, in 2019, all of our renewable resources, they produced the equivalent of 46% of our total retail sales. They're equivalent to about half of all the energy consumed by our customers. So pretty significant change in our portfolio over time. And all of that kind of ties into these questions here and the ability to run the system in a zombie apocalypse. So this is what it used to look like here at LES historically. We ran all of our generation to serve our local load. Now, if we had excess generation, we might make some sales to other utilities who needed some cheap power. If we could find cheap power elsewhere, maybe a little cheaper than some of our resources could produce it, we might make a purchase from another utility. But by and large, all of our generation went towards serving all of our load. And because of that, just like Mark mentioned, they had to be in balance. So every second of every minute of every hour of every day, forever, our load and our generation matched. Exactly. That's the way it is. There's not wide-scale storage on the system today, so they have to match. But this construct changed when LES, along with other utilities in Nebraska, joined the Southwest Power Pool. Under the Southwest Power Pool, all of our generation here locally goes towards serving the load of the entire Southwest Power Pool footprint. And you can see it there. It's a pretty long area. It stretches from northern Texas all the way up to the Canadian border. And it's about the width of Nebraska all the way up. Now, in turn, all of the energy that we need to supply our load, like the lights that are on where you're at right now, we purchase that from the Southwest Power Pool. So what's that mean? Well, we no longer start and stop our units based on where our load is going. The Southwest Power Pool tells us what units to start, when to start them, what output they want, and when to shut them down. And they do all that to balance load across the entire Southwest Power Pool region. So what's that mean to LES's load and generation? They no longer match. There's days we have a lot of generation online and very little load, and there's days we have a lot of load but very little generation, because our balance locally doesn't matter. There's only one entity that has to balance in the Southwest Power Pool, and that's the Southwest Power Pool themselves. They balance the entire area. That's their job. So how do they decide what units to run then? Because think of the number of generating plants they would have at their disposal to meet the total load. Well, this is kind of simplistic form, but it's honestly really close to what they do. So they kind of stack them up and they say, well, let's start with the lowest cost units. And then we'll just keep stacking them up until we end up at the top is the highest cost generation. And you can see there, we've kind of got a heat map. So the lowest cost generation is like a nice cool blue color, and the hotter it gets all the way up to red, that's the higher cost generation. And so the Southwest Power Pool says, okay, we know what our order is for our generation from lowest cost to highest cost. So let's look at what the load is. All right, so there's our load. Well, so we know, since we've got a balance, that we need exactly that much generation to serve that amount of load. And that in turn sets the market price. The market price in the Southwest Power Pool represents the price to serve the next 1 megawatt of energy needs, okay? So they look at, well, here's how many generators are on, and if the load goes up by 1 megawatt, where are we gonna get that megawatt from? And the cost of that generator that would serve the megawatt sets the market price. That market price dictates two things. One, every generator that's online gets paid that amount of money to generate. All the load that's online has to pay the market price, has to pay that amount of money to get their load served. So that's how the market price works, all right? So let's walk through how this changes on a really minute-by-minute basis. So if we've got an example, let's say the sun comes out, all right? So the sun comes out, it's a day like today, it's getting in the afternoon, it's really hot. Well, what do you think happens? Well, everybody's got their air conditioner on, right? So it gets hotter out, the air conditioner has to work harder. So what's that mean to the load? The load goes up. So since the load goes up, the Southwest Power Pool says, well, we've got to run more generation to meet that load. And since we dispatch it from a lowest cost to highest cost order, that means the market price, the price to serve the next megawatt has to go up. So we get into higher price generation. That means all the generators are now getting paid a higher price to run, but all the load is paying a higher price to get their energy needs served. Let's reset and go through another example. Let's say that in the Southwest Power Pool, you had a whole bunch of wind generation. All right, wind is a really low cost resource because it doesn't require any fuel. Once you build it, the wind is free. So it's pretty free to operate it. So that's a good thing for lowering market prices. And then what if we also had the price of natural gas go down? Well, then that means all the generators in the Southwest Power Pool that run natural gas to create electricity, they can do that more cost effectively. Their costs go down, so the price of their energy goes down. Well, so now when we look at that, what does that actually mean to the Southwest Power Pool market? Well, the load doesn't change because all we did was change the generation side. The load is the load. But if you keep your eye on that colored bar there, since we have all this low price generation, now there's a lot more low cost units for SPP to use. So it displaces a lot of the higher cost generation. The price to serve the next megawatt got a lot cheaper because they're doing it with a lower cost unit. And so in turn, the generators are getting paid less for the market price and the load is paying less for the market price. Now let's do one more example that's relevant to our discussion today. So hypothetically, let's say there was a zombie apocalypse, all right? And let's say this particular breed of zombies, you know what they really love? They love electricity generation. They love power plants. They love to eat power plants, all right? So you end up with zombies all over the Southwest Power Pool footprint, and they congregate at all the power plants because that is their favorite food in the world. Well, what do you think is going to happen to those power plants? A lot of them are probably going to break, right? Because they got a lot of zombies chewing on them and trying to break in. And so if you keep your eye on that generation stack, well, now all the units that were already on, from a cost standpoint, they're probably the cheapest ones. That's why they were on in the first place. So as the zombies attack and they break those units, SPP has to call on new units, which are more expensive. And so all of a sudden you see the market price get very expensive because now SPPs, the Southwest Power Pools, have to rely on units that are at a higher cost that normally wouldn't operate. But in a zombie apocalypse, they become necessary to meet the load. So let's look at the Southwest Power Pool, since they're doing that balancing, how hard their job is to maintain that. Now this is a look at all of the units that were running in the Southwest Power Pool from a few days in March of 2018. These are charts that the Southwest Power Pool put out during their annual planning summit. And so what you can see here is the yellow is nuclear. You can see that's pretty stable down at the bottom. The gray line is coal. The orange line is natural gas. The blue line is hydroelectric power. The green line is wind. There's a little bit of other at the bottom, and then you can see a little bit of solar in red bouncing along at the bottom as well. This is all of the resources in SPP that had to run to serve the load reliably during this period, and they're grouped by fuel type. Now, the load isn't on here. You'll notice that, right? Always show us the generation. But since you're all following along and you're all smart cookies, if I told you, well, given this information, could you come up with the load? You'd say, absolutely I could, because I know the generation has to equal the load. They have to always balance every second. So if I took all those generation charts and I added them together, the total, the aggregate, that would be the load chart over this same period. SPP, the Southwest Power Pool, they're juggling a lot of different resource types to meet that load. If you look over here between March 1st and March 2nd, if you look at the green line, the wind, you can see that it went way down, right? Well, when the wind died on March 1st and March 2nd, look at the orange line, the natural gas, and the gray line, the coal, they responded. So the Southwest Power Pool said, oh, the wind went away. I've got to rely on something else to fill that need. They do that with what they call dispatchable resources. When you have things like wind and solar, the Southwest Power Pool can't control how much energy they get out of those. The only person in control of that is Mother Nature. But the Southwest Power Pool can control things like coal and natural gas and hydroelectric units. And so they use those to try to balance out between the load and generation, the shortfalls they have from things like wind and solar. Now this is kind of a normal period, what you see here. What I've got here is a chart from March 26th of 2018. And this is a day that was a little difficult for the Southwest Power Pool. Now at the top of that chart, you see two lines. The green dotted line, that was the forecasted load for the entire Southwest Power Pool on that day. That was the Southwest Power Pool's guess prior to the day of what the load profile would look like, the total load in their area. The black line, that's what the actual load ended up being. And you can see they weren't right on, but that's pretty good, right? They did a pretty good job of guessing that. Well, if you look down at the bottom of the chart, the blue dashed line, that was what they forecast they were going to get from generation of all the wind resources in their footprint. And on that one, on this particular day, their forecast wasn't very good, right? Because look at the red line. That's what the actual wind looked like on that day. And at its worst, they were off by 7 gigawatts. That is 7,000 megawatts. Remember, I said 1 megawatt is enough to power about 250 average Lincoln homes. So 7,000 megawatts, that's a lot. If you have another frame of reference, if you look at LES, so all of the city of Lincoln and Waverly, our total max load is around 750 megawatts, a little bit more. So when you're off by 7,000 megawatts, you get missed by a long ways. But just because they're missed, that doesn't mean that the lights have to go out. They've got to try and control that. So this chart showed you what they did to respond. So this is on that same day, March 26th. And if you look at the orange line, that's what all the wind output was doing in the Southwest Power Pool. And as you can see, just like we talked about, as they go across the day, it goes down, 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 because Mother Nature, unbeknownst to SPP or the Southwest Power Pool before the day started, Mother Nature kept dialing back the wind as the day grew on. The blue line, that is all of the excess generating capacity that the Southwest Power Pool had at their disposal. So, okay, so what is that? Well, what that means is they've got generators running all over their region, but they're not all running at their maximum output. They might be running at 50% of their capacity. They might be running at 40%, 75%. So that excess capacity they have, well, that is available to the Southwest Power Pool. It's like driving your car down the street, but instead of putting the foot pedal to the floor, you got it halfway. So you've got excess capacity. You know you can go faster if you push the foot pedal down. So the Southwest Power Pool knows they have excess capacity. Well, as you can see, as the wind went down throughout the day, the excess capacity available to the Southwest Power Pool went down throughout the day. Well, why is that? Well, it's because the Southwest Power Pool was taking more of that excess capacity and no longer holding it in reserve. They were operating it to make up for the shortfall that came about from the wind. That all makes sense. Really not that big a deal. Until you get to the middle part of the day, and if you pay attention to that chart, there's quite a few periods where the excess capacity is down flirting with zero. During those periods, the Southwest Power Pool actually used almost all the generation that was already online and available to them. So what they had to do was start other generators that were sitting idle and bring them on to fill the gap that was left because the wind started going away on. Well, so because of what we went through before, we know those generators that were sitting idle and got called on later, they're probably some of the more expensive generators in the Southwest Power Pool. So the cost, the market price to serve the next megawatt goes way up, right? But there's another part of this, the reliability side. A lot of times those more expensive generators that sit idle most of the year, well, they don't get exercised as often, so they don't work as well. They're not as quick to start when you hit the start button and come up. Sometimes they have problems. And so the Southwest Power Pool on this particular day was getting really nervous because they were starting to dip into really high priced resources that don't run very often. And it's okay if when you pull on the trigger and they all go, not that big of a deal, but you can see as you're flirting with zero on those excesses, if you ever try to start some generation and it doesn't come through for you, it doesn't fire, now you might have a real problem, and now you start seeing the lights around. So that gives you an idea of how LES operates, how we operate in the Southwest Power Pool, how the Southwest Power Pool balances load and generation, and how on some days, not every day, but not uncommon, they have some difficulty in making that balance. And that's because there's two variables they have to account for. There's always been the load. The load goes up and down. When you turn on the light in your house or you turn your air conditioner down, you don't call somebody at LES and make sure it's okay. You just change it because it's our job to react to it. But the load's always moving. But now when you see the growth of renewable resources like wind and solar, they're also always moving, and the Southwest Power Pool doesn't have control of them. So it makes days like the March 26th all the more common, makes the Southwest Power Pool's job more difficult. So given that frame of reference for how everything works, Mark, let's go back and revisit the polling question and see if people have a different thought on that last one.
Okay, now that you've had, all right, let's have everybody respond to that poll question and see what people think after learning about how this actually works day to day, minute to minute. How would the community continue to receive electricity after we get this invasion of power-hungry zombies? How are we doing on results there, Kelly?
Come on, Kelly.
16.
The suspense is
We got
killing
about
me.
half.
I know.
Keep sending in those votes.
I think Scott.
Hard then.
There we go.
Let's see if Scott got his message across here. He's just interested to know if anybody's listening.
They're still coming in.
Okay.
You've put people deep in thought.
Well, I think people have taken copious notes as Scott was presenting, and so they're reviewing their notes to come to a conclusion, don't you think?
I know that's what you would do, Mark.
I would be. I was taking
All right.
copious notes. This was the 5th time I've heard the presentation. I was taking copious notes.
Looks like they've dwindled off, so let's go ahead and see what this poll turns up.
Goodness. Scott, you made a real impression on this group.
We did make an improvement. We did make an improvement.
Yeah. Wow. Do you remember it was about a third of the group said before the presentation that the power plants would just continue to operate, or that the wind and solar would continue to operate. And now 3/4 say there's no practical way to do it. They were taking copious notes.
And that was good because that was a takeaway that we were hoping everybody would get from that. You know, and you got to be a little bit nerdy like Mark and I won't include Kelly in that, but it was nerdy to think about this. But now we've cursed you. You've got the nerd curse. So the next time you're watching a movie about the zombie apocalypse or a TV show or playing a game, trust me, you will notice that the lights are on. And now you're going to go, huh, how could that be possible that the lights would be on in a zombie apocalypse? So hopefully we've got you a little more prepared for an apocalypse should it ever come upon us. The one thing you can guarantee, the lights are probably going to go out at some point. So you should have your flashlight handy.
Looks like we got some questions, Kelly.
Yep, so first question, why doesn't the nuclear generation fluctuate? Is it because 2,000 megawatts is its maximum generation and it's a cheaper form of energy?
So yeah, right on target. There's really two answers to that. One is nuclear is a really low cost from an operating standpoint form of energy. Now it costs a lot of time and money up front to build a nuclear plant, but once you have one, it's really low cost energy. So when the market stacks up the resources from low cost to high, nuclear is one of the first things it always wants to dispatch. So it's kind of inherently always going to be on at around its maximum output. The other thing is nuclear doesn't chase load very well, so it doesn't move up and down as much. It's not very fast at doing that. So it works out well that it's cheap. It just kind of sits there fully loaded, and it's not really built to run around. So that's why you see that.
I think the next question is more of a comment. If zombies are attracted to power plants, there is no way to manage the grid. Maybe train the zombies to go into a giant hamster turbine generator.
Well,
is that a possibility?
Yeah, that'd be a great idea. You know, I don't know for sure who you're going to find to build the giant gerbil wheel or hamster wheel during the zombie apocalypse, but if you could get that done, that might be an okay thing to do. Under our hypothetical situation where zombies love to eat power plants.
The next question is maybe more about security and resiliency. How is LES preparing or monitoring for a situation where the local or national grid is attacked by domestic or foreign terrorists? Probably more likely than zombies.
Well, you're a little bit outside of Mark in my area. We didn't get a cybersecurity person on here, but LES has a team of folks that are always monitoring for those kind of things. They're hooked up with people all around the country at the highest level who are keeping them apprised of what might be going on. But really, if things did happen from a cyber event, you deal with it no different than if you had a weather catastrophe or some kind of other large outage. You've got units that are compromised, you've got pieces of your system that are compromised, and you have pieces that aren't, and pieces that are still working properly. And our job is to take the pieces that are working properly and keep things held together for long enough to get the other things back in a healthy state so we can keep the lights on. So you kind of approach the problems in the same way.
Thanks, Scott. Next question, how quickly can SPP dispatch the need and then the utility respond? And what happens if the utility person who needs to hit the go switch is being nibbled by a zombie? Is this an automated turn on the go switch process?
So it depends on the utility and the resource. Some of those are automated, so the Southwest Power Pool can send the signal to the unit. There's always some kind of typically local oversight to make sure everything's okay, and then you can start the unit up. That'll depend on the utility and the plant, how much oversight is required, whether the signal goes right in, there's a check and it takes off, or the signal goes and it needs some human interaction to take the signal and hit the button. But those things are all built to happen. It happens really quick. The Southwest Power Pool, when we talk about balancing their load and generation, they actually dispatch all the units in their footprint every 5 minutes. So every 5 minutes of forever, they change where all the units are supposed to operate. And then within those 5 minutes, they're trying to move different things around to always balance the load and generation. So it's a pretty instantaneous happening when they're moving those things up and down.
The next question, do you feel like microgrids would help?
You know, that came from an engineer.
So just so everybody's aware, a microgrid is a piece of the system that you can essentially disconnect from the rest of the grid and operate on its own. And then when the rest of the grid is back up and functioning perfectly, you can reconnect. So it just gives you the ability to run in two different ways. Connected to the overall grid, normally, we're disconnecting and running as a little island until the overall grid is healthy again. So yeah, if you had a zombie apocalypse and your home or your neighborhood or your business was set up to be a microgrid, you could disconnect, and as long as you kept the zombies at bay, you could continue to operate until the National Guard came in and moved all the zombies out and the power grid was up and running, you could connect back to it. So that would be no problem. The only catch is if you have a microgrid, now the same problem that is posed to the Southwest Power Pool, balancing load and generation, is now on your shoulders. You've got to balance the load and the generation on your microgrid. So you have to make sure that you have the right resources there to do that, the right mix, so you can make things go up and down to balance. You also have the issue with a microgrid that as long as everything's working perfectly, no problem. But if your main generator, maybe you have a natural gas genset that works with a lot of solar and wind, so you got a great microgrid, and the natural gas genset, the generator, that's the thing that actually makes sure you balance the load to your solar and wind. If that natural gas generator breaks, now you got a problem. So microgrid would be great as long as everything continues to run perfectly.
Okay. Cody asks, what is the highest cost source of energy and what is the lowest?
So when we look at low cost, we'll start there since that's how the stack goes. We already talked about nuclear from an operating standpoint is a really low cost unit. right? You also have wind and solar. Wind and solar are incredibly low cost because they have no fuel required from them. So wind and solar are probably the lowest cost resources, followed by nuclear. Then you go up, the next is probably coal resources. Then you get into natural gas resources, which can be a pretty widespread because some are more efficient than others. And probably at the top end, you end up with diesel or fuel oil resources. Those kinds of things are going to be a little bit more expensive, and usually the things that come on a little bit later in the dispatch.
Great. The next question, it seems that there is much less wind power generated in Nebraska compared to other states around us. Why is this, and is this likely to change?
Well, so I think some of the other states around us, there were some state provisions, some extra incentives that went towards people putting wind in. And these are not incentives aimed at utilities. They're incentives aimed at the people that actually build the wind projects. There are federal incentives that apply to everyone across the U.S., but some states have put incentives in on top of those federal incentives, and those obviously go to growing more wind. When you look at the state of Nebraska, actually the growth in Nebraska has been really good over the last few years, and you would imagine that it's poised to continue well into the future because Nebraska has a really good wind resource.
Great. Next question, if several utilities have the same price generation, how does SPP choose which utilities generation to use?
Well, so what I said before is that's pretty much how the market works, but it's rather simplistic. So when you really look at it, you have units all over the footprint, and the load varies all over at Southwest Power Pool's footprint. So if you have a lot of load in the southern part, and there's a generator in the southern part that happens to be the same price as a generator in the northern part where there's less load, you're probably going to lean on the one to the south a little bit harder because there's less losses running a generator closer to a big load than there is further away. So there's a lot more complexity into how we showed the stack, but that is how it works.
I share in finding the answer to the next question, which is, should we be concerned with how much Scott and Mark know about zombies?
Okay, so I feel like I need to tell you the story so you don't think that Mark and we're nerdy, but we're not that nerdy, okay? This all came about, it was, I believe, 2019, I think, that the university, they have a group of people that it's a series of meetings called SciPops. Did I get that right, Kelly? Is it SciPops, I think?
SciPop Talks, yep.
Where they look at where science and popular things out in the world where they kind of cross. And so they talk about different things. And they asked us if we could come in and talk about something to do with electricity that would get into pop culture. And it just so happened that we did that talk just a couple of days after Halloween. And so given all that pretense, we decided, you know what, let's talk about zombies because it's pretty close to Halloween. And we'll talk about, could the power run in a zombie apocalypse? Because now you're getting to where Mark and I are just nerdy enough to notice that the lights are on in zombie.
No, you don't have it right, Scott. Your memory is not right. As I recall it, there was a request that came in, and basically it was, which two staff members have the most resemblance to zombies? That's what I remember.
That's
what I remember. And I recall that follically challenged individuals are very close in resemblance to zombies. And so that's how we were selected. That's what I remember, at least.
That's what I remember.
That's quite possible.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, we have another question in. Can you answer which order of generation is the most reliable?
So kind of instead of the cost thing, but we're talking about reliability?
Yep.
Okay, so there's not really going to be a great rule of thumb there. Now, it depends on what you call reliable. When you look at things like wind and solar, they're not per se as reliable as something that you can just control up and down by putting more fuel in. But if you're talking about reliability, when I want it to start, it starts, well, then they're all kind of on the same playing field. As long as you maintain them well, give them the right amount of love, time, and attention, you can make it so where most times when you want to start them, they'll come up. You know, really, it's a lot like your car. If you have a newer car, odds are every time you go out to start it, you expect it to run, right? You're kind of taken aback when it doesn't start or there's a problem. Now, as your car gets older, what do you learn? I got to do the right things. I have to keep my car healthy. Otherwise, it's not going to start every time when I go and turn the key, right? You also start to learn that as it gets older, your car has some quirks, some idiosyncrasies, and you know how to work around them to make it run correctly. That's the same thing with generators. So from a reliability standpoint, they're all on a pretty even keel as long as you take care of them and maintain them properly.
Gotcha. Well, I think we're being tested on the question here, because I think any engineer on this call, if a question comes in on how solar farms or wind turbines or pretty much distribution transmission lines look ugly versus attractive, we love them and we love to look at them. But the question is, are they making any move on solar farms to make them a little bit better looking, according to Steve?
I don't think there's been a lot of changes in the look of solar projects. But what you do see is sometimes people will do things with the landscaping around the solar project. One of the things that solar has in its favor, as opposed to maybe something like wind, is that it's got a low profile. It sits low to the ground. And so a lot of times around solar projects, what you'll see is they'll put in trees, or they'll actually build earth berms and then put trees and landscaping on top of them. Because if you do things like that, you can make it to where most people don't even see the solar project until they get right on top of it. Obviously, when you're talking about wind projects, that's never going to be an option because the turbines are just too tall. But Kelly's right. We kind of think all of them look beautiful in their own way.
That's kind of the end of the Q&A that's been submitted so far. We've got a little bit of time. As we talk about zombies and we talk about generation, Scott, why don't you share with us the story of how this really all started, where you were in a movie theater watching I Am Legend with your family?
Well, that is true. My family and I went to I Am Legend, and we got to that same part, that the very end of the movie, and they show the wind turbines, and I thought, well, that's kind of dumb, because there's no way that they're going to have this little community and they're going to run these wind turbines. Hold on, let me hang up my phone. And keep everything running. And so we got out of the movie, and right away my kids said, boy, that was a good show. Everybody liked it. And I said, it was really good. But it was pretty dumb at the end how they said that they could run electricity to all that. And my kids thought that was a new low, even for myself, that I would notice such a thing, because they, believe me, there was no one else in my family who even paid attention to that at all. Somebody's house is on fire.
A zombie's trying to reach you.
Yeah,
right.
Twice. It's probably one of my kids, because we always tell them, if the house is on fire, call twice, because I might hang up on you once, but not a second time.
Well, we are done with today's program. I don't see any additional questions coming in. So thank you, Scott and Mark, for providing some of your insight on would we end up having power post-zombie apocalypse. So have we answered it?
I think we got the point across.
We did the best we could.
We're ready in case the zombies come. We're ready.
Well, thank you to both of you, and thanks to all of the attendees on today's session. We have more programming available on les.com/fest. We have additional live sessions, mini sessions, and some really great activities. So we encourage you to go there and check it out. And then upon leaving today's session, you will see a survey pop up. Go ahead, take a brief minute, fill that out so that we can better serve you. Hope you all have a great day, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Better answer that, Scott.
Yeah.